What I'm going to do now is to describe to you the design and the development of the design of what's becoming known as the Chilterns Long Tunnel. The Chilterns Long Tunnel is a radical development of the Green Tunnel, about which I described to the last member steering group. The Green Tunnel, you'll recall, was a result of a contract which the council let to Peter Brett Associates, and that tunnel was the result of a lot of work to do with geology, hydrology, and the basic alignment of the tunnel in order to generate a more satisfactory solution than the government's proposed scheme. The work which went into that particular analysis is described in figure 2, and what I'm going to do is describe, by the way, what I'm going to by way of explanation is a number of drawings number 017 and 018, and figures 1, 2, 3 and 4, all of which you will have in front of you. If one turns first of all to figure 2, you will see where we started in all of this. This is the government's proposed scheme. The intervention shafts or ventilation shafts are shown by red dots. The full lines are the surface transit, and the gaps indicate where they have proposed a tunnel. Now, the work that went into developing that was done by HS2 Limited, as you know, and the work which went into the development of the green route was done by, as I say, Peter Brett Associates on behalf of the council. And the green route had to satisfy a number of criteria and options, and you'll see the green route just for reference on figure 1, which you've also got. Now, the criteria for choice for the green route, it's worth considering just for a moment. And these were matters largely to do with proximity to Wendover, for example, avoiding going under settlements. It was to do with dealing with the society at large in a rather more rational way than perhaps HS2 did, accepting as a fixed starting point the south portal at the M25, accepting that we couldn't go much beyond beyond Stoke Mandeville, otherwise we were going well outside the Chilterns, and to make a reasoned argument in favour of a continuous tunnel designed as a tunnel rather than a surface route, which was designed as a surface route and ended up partly as a tunnel. We also were keen to operate within a bandwidth of 3 kilometres each side of the government's proposed scheme. So those and a few other things were the original criteria for choice, as it were. The main design criteria were the design standards adopted by government, by HS2 Limited. The horizontal and vertical geometry, of course, which was a pretty crucial matter in these things. The tunnel lining diameter, the portal exit, geology and hydrology, and all those matters which went into a good sound engineering design. And then the main construction criteria hinged really around construction strategy, construction compounds, and so on and so forth. And the chalk waste disposal is something which we touched upon, and the tunnel boring machine drive rates is another matter which came into this. And on figure 1, you'll see the result of that. The green route, which came out as the council's preferred choice on the recommendations of PBA and others, is shown on this diagram, and for the moment ignore the sort of spaghetti-like effect on the northern end with brown and pink and so forth. But that gives you a sort of memory jogger, if you like, as to how the green route came about and where it is and what it looked like. The other reference, incidentally, to both of those routes can be found on the drawing number 017, and the top drawing of 017 gives, to a larger scale of 1 to 50,000, the surface features of the government's proposed scheme, known as the reference alignment, and trust me, that's going to be changed. And on the bottom of those two drawings, known as the pink route, and that's going to be changed as well, is what I'm referring to as the Chilterns Long Tunnel. And you'll see that the impact on the landscape of both of those schemes is readily apparent from those two drawings. So what has changed? What changed between the green route, which was published in April this year and made public in May this year, and accepted by the council. It's more instructive sometimes to look at what rather has not changed. That's what's remained the same. Firstly, the entire list of criteria for choice remains the same. I've illustrated a few of them already. The design criteria have not changed other than in one particular, and I'll come to that in a moment. And the construction criteria have not changed either, although I must admit that with regard to construction strategy and waste disposal, we perhaps could have done a little bit more work than was done on the green route, but nonetheless there it was. So what has changed? Well, dealing with what's not changed, I mean, that is a considerable body of work that the council has commissioned. It's invested considerable resources and capital in doing that. And the fact that it is not changed means that the value of that investment remains intact, and that is a substantial value, and it's certainly proved its worth in the work that's being done now. Now, the thing that has changed, which made a material effect on the design of the Chilterns Long Tunnel, was the European Union decision on the interoperability of trains, to give it its almost full title, which led to the requirement for an intervention gap open to air for any tunnel longer than 20 kilometres. And it was that particular feature that dictated, by and large, the location horizontally and vertically of the old green route. Now, in June this year, we were advised that the EU decision was being changed and being substituted by an EU regulation. And the EU regulation, which comes into force, I gather, in spring next year, provided us with an opportunity to have an even better route than the green route. And that is the one we were working on at the moment. Now, that green route, that I say has an intervention gap, the existing EU decision requires it, whereas the new regulation that's coming into force next year makes no requirement for an intervention gap at all, although if one wants one, you can have one. What it does require is that within any 20 kilometre long tunnel, there must be what's known as a firefighting point, otherwise known as an underground station. And this means that the underground station can be at a much lower level. It doesn't have to be at the surface, which means that the vertical alignment can be deeper. And if the vertical alignment is deeper and there is no requirement to access the surface, then of course the horizontal alignment changes as well. So within the space of quite a few days, I was obliged to advise the council that the green route may not any longer be, as a result of this new legislation coming forward, may no longer be the most optimum one for the council to go forward to the select committee next year or whenever it's going to be. So the principal reason for moving to another contract with Peter Brett Associates for another design for another tunnel was primarily, almost exclusively, the reasoning behind the EU regulation that's come out for long tunnels. And that regulation was interesting because it's a regulation primarily to do with the design of trains. And the design of trains means that the running time in case of a breakdown or a fire is at 80 kilometres an hour for 15 minutes, which gives you the 20 kilometre distance, and so on. So that was a major contribution, if not, as I say, the main contribution to moving from the green route to what I'm now calling the Chilterns Long Tunnel. And the Chilterns Long Tunnel is described on figure 3, which you've also got, and you'll see figure 3 has the intervention or ventilation shafts of the Chilterns Long Tunnel, and also if you look again at drawing 017, you'll see much the same sort of thing. It follows the route of the government's proposed scheme horizontally for most of its distance, vertically for about half of its distance, and at the end it takes the opportunity of avoiding Wendover and also coming out from the escarpment with a northern portal in a more convenient place. The exit from the scarp at Wendover is illustrated on figure 4, and figure 4 shows what happens when the Chilterns Long Tunnel deviates horizontally from the government's proposed scheme, and I hope that drawing is self-explanatory. Drawing 018, I would also draw your attention to, because this begins to set out some of the major benefits of the Chilterns Long Tunnel as it is now being designed. On drawing 018, at the top you'll see to an appropriate scale the government's proposed scheme in red, and also the Chilterns Long Tunnel, I think, in pink. The humpback whale drawing, which I've drawn your attention to on previous occasions, of the government's proposed scheme, the long section through it, is shown on the first horizontal section on the same drawing 018, and below it, by means of comparison for you, I've had drawn the Chilterns Long Tunnel. You can see at a glance how odd, in comparison, the government's proposed scheme is. It makes no sense at all to make that sort of detour up the hill and back down again, when the opportunity now exists for making a much more level transit underneath Chilterns. And on that point about the level transit, you've heard me describe to you before, I think, about the rise between the passage underneath the River Misbourne to the summit of the government's proposed scheme, and that summit rise on the government proposed scheme is 149 metres. On the old, I'm now required to call it green route, that rise was 106 metres, and on the Chilterns Long Tunnel, which is on the drawing in front of you on drawing 018, the rise is only 77 metres. Which means that the energy required to get a train up to the summit on the government's proposed scheme, if one takes that as being 100%, then on the route that we're now currently calling the Chilterns Long Tunnel, it's theoretically 52%, so between half and 2/3 of the energy required to make a northern passage by a full train up that slope. And the same applies coming down the other way, of course. Which means that in comparison with the green route came out rather well. It's about 3/4 of the energy requirement. We're now down to about half, or perhaps 2/3, depending on the efficiency and the rolling friction and so forth. But that broadly speaking is where we are with that. Now, one of the things that has happened, and you'll be aware of this, is that Peter Brett Associates have produced an interim report. And one of my responsibilities is signing off on behalf of the Council that report as being technically correct and making the recommendations which are supported by evidence. And I have a few matters on that to draw to your attention. Firstly, the location of the horizontal alignment and its in the vertical alignment calculations, in other words, the overall geometry. I have no problems with at all in recommending that the acceptance of that. I have no problems in recommending the starting point, the tangent point with the viaduct across the Colne Valley, and the disposition of ventilation shafts by and large, and I'll come back to in a moment, I don't have a problem with either. Those follow the route of the government's proposed scheme. It's a workmanlike solution, and I can't see any reason, with one exception, for not supporting that. So far as the North Portal is concerned, I've encouraged PBA to make a suggestion, which they've done. I gather the council now has it, of landscaping the Northern Portal in a rather more innovative way than simply a concrete tube coming out as a pressure relief mechanism through the escarpment, and an attempt has been made to do that, and I think it's a robust solution. It's not yet an elegant solution, but perhaps that's the way it's drawn. But nonetheless, it is an attempt to deal with that particular problem. So far as the ventilation shafts are concerned, if I draw your attention, I think it is to figure 3. You'll see that there are 8 ventilation shafts, numbered from, not on your drawing but on mine, 1 in the south to number 8 in the north, right next to the North Portal. Now, number 8, I think, is to some extent redundant, and that's a matter which I've got to discuss with PBA. The position of the ventilation shafts at 3 to 4 kilometres intervals is far more frequent than one finds anywhere on mainland Europe for comparable tunnels. And I think the opportunity has to be taken in this report to begin to draw attention to that in a more robust way than perhaps has been done so far. Cross passages between the two running bores are currently designed at 350 metre centres. Common practice now in mainland Europe is to have these at 500, and certainly the EU regulation draws attention to the possibility of being able to do that. And that's something I think we need to talk about later on. But most importantly, I think, is the location of the underground station, or firefighting point, as it's described in the new draft regulation. And there are two possibilities for this. One which is gaining traction, certainly within PBA, which is to locate it near Little Missenden, on the ventilation shaft location there. And the second one is to locate it near Wendover Dean, near the fire crest. And for a variety of reasons, PBA are beginning to focus their attention on having it at Little Missenden. And unfortunately, I can find no evidence from them yet to support the assertion that that is the best place for it. It's described to me as being a balanced solution. It's certainly symmetrical in the sense it's in the middle. And I think one of the things, well, I don't think I know, one of the things I'm going to have to ask PBA to do is to provide more evidence to support the assertion that that is the best place. And if it is, then so be it. If it isn't, then we have the possibility of having it at Wendover Dean. What I'm reluctant to do on behalf of the council is to, unless instructed otherwise of course, is to have a report which has an alternative in it, because going to the select committee with two possibilities may not be the most sensible approach. Lastly, almost lastly, is the matter of cost. The cost estimates are not yet complete, which is a shame, and it is floating about as it did last time, and that's something which I've got to bring some logic to bear on the argument as to how these prices are being arrived at, or rather costs, they're not prices, and the extent to which that moves over to work package B, which PBA have just started on, which is the matter of evaluating risk. What I do know is that the difference in costs between the government's proposed scheme is moving downwards, which means that the cost of the tunnel rate is moving downwards, one assumes, and consequently the cost differential between the two is slowly grinding away downwards. My current evaluation, looking at the numbers that I've been presented with, is that the cost differential is somewhere between 330 million or 350 perhaps, and 160 or 170 million. And that is a pretty fluid position to be in, unfortunately. Fortunately, the differential seems to be falling, and I've yet to put my finger on why that is. It's something I'm not particularly comfortable with at the moment. So with regard to recommending for acceptance the document that PBA are putting forward, I have principally 4 reservations. One is a matter of detail to do with ventilation shafts, locations and so on, which I think as an interim report one could live with. The rest of it is quite satisfactory. So far as the location of the underground station, emergency underground station, is concerned, there's a lot more evidence to be produced in order to make a conclusion on that I could recommend to the council, or not, as the case may be. And with regard to cost, it's something that has to be grounded in some fact, as opposed to supposition based on information that may or may not have been current from HS2 Limited. And it may be, of course, in the long run, that it is only at the select committee that this can be dealt with properly, because at that point the select committee can order HS2 Limited and government to release the cost base which they've been using. And lastly, of course, there's the text. The text's been written in the interim report by several hands. It's quite obvious. I think we have to, as we did last time, bring to bear some sense and logic to the arguments that are in the document, which doesn't invalidate an interim report, but nonetheless it's something which I'm going to have to do. And my final point is that I'm going to write, as I did last time, the summary and also the abstract of the document for perhaps external publication, and certainly for the beginnings of the submission to the select committee. Thank you very much.